Heyo everyone, it's AJ, and today I would like to talk about some more Bungo Stray Dogs theories. Because, well, it's been like 2 years since I did like the theory video where I just talked about a wee bunch of mini little theories and whatnot, but, well, at the time, blew my mind. And, well, a couple of years have been like, hey, let's talk about theories, so, more theories! And frankly, I have been meaning to, like, talk about this one since April because that was when I discovered this theory. So, yeah, I'm a bit late. What a shock. So, anyway, first disclaimer, just getting it out there. I did not come up with a theory that we're going to be discussing today. It's all on the Twitter that I found. So, there's been lots of people that have talked about this theory. But the one that I'm going to kind of focus on mostly is the one that I found, which is done by at Skelly Choo Choo on Twitter. Because, frankly, it's great because there's a lovely thread. Like, you'll see this lovely little thread here. And basically, they break it all down and what, like, to like back up their points and whatnot. And there is also like a lovely like document as well. So if you want like more in-depth knowledge and whatnot of what they think about how this theory how this theory works, you can read that instead, which is very fine and dandy. So that is what I'm going to be referring to today, and I will also note that I will not be discussing everything that they talk about because frankly, for personal sakes, I don't want to talk about everything. Mostly because some of the points that they bring out is just kind of like wee moo moments. Keeping it in theme with Bungo Stray Dogs. But that's just my personal opinion. But like, I can understand why they brought them up. But, so, I will put the link down in the doobly-doo. I will put the link down in the description so that you can go to the Twitter feed and then you can either look at the essay version or you can read the quick version of the thread. So, all fine and dandy there. So, and what theory are we discussing today? Well, the theory that Sigma is Ian Fleming, because Sigma is that lovely enigma of the series of who the fuck are you? You're a 3-year-old man, like, something's not right. So, this theory is all about who Sigma is, like, what obviously, because they have an ability, generally means they have a corresponding offer to go with it. And given the impact that Sigma has created in the story, well, it makes sense. Given that this theory obviously came out in April, in terms of manga-wise, about how we're using like evidence from the manga, it's about roughly up to like chapter 106.5. So, very key moments for Sigma, really. And backing up some queries and whatnot about how this theory come to be. First things first, main thing we need to kind of discuss. Who is Ian Fleming and why are they getting chosen out of the vast amount of like offers that Asagiri could choose from? Well, so aside from being the offer of, well, whilst I'm doing my own little weird research for this, Chitty Bang Bang, which is fucking weird in itself, but not what we're discussing, the main thing is, he's well known for his James Bond series. You know, the man that like isn't really like that shy to like gamble in casinos or anything like that. Uses a lot of guns, like takes down like Russians and all that, especially when they're trying to commit global acts of terrorism and whatnot. Oh wait, that does sound familiar. Oh wait. Yeah. So, this is where it all begins, and like, why is Sigma Ian Fleming? Because frankly, there is so many parallels for why Sigma is basically like James Bond. Hence why we are discussing this. So, just to kind of kick things off with maybe like the most kind of obvious, kind of like slap in your face, kind of, well, this could be potentially why. What is the arc called when Sigma is introduced? It is called Skyfall. And I don't know about you, but the only Skyfall that I know is the big ass James Bond movie that came out like almost like a decade ago now. And given the fact that it was a very successful movie, also ignored obviously Skyfall by Adele, but obviously that song was actually made for the movie. So don't come at me saying that's the other Skyfall. But to note that Skyfall isn't a adaptation of one of Ian Fleming's books. It's kind of an amalgamation of like other stories. So basically like taking a bit here, taking a bit there, creating this original story for James Bond. So, which would be like, okay, I can kind of see this is like the wee stepping stone of like, okay, can maybe see it at a push. Now, where were we introduced to Sigma? Oh yes, a fucking Sky Casino. A casino. You know, where James Bond likes to end up in places. A casino. From these little stepping stones, we can now kind of jump into, well, what could Sigma's ability be called? Like, what's its name? Because obviously, within the series of Bungo Stray Dogs, generally, everyone's ability is named after, like, the title of the literature work. You know? So, given the fact that we are introduced to Sigma in the casino, and, well, why not? Let's go with Casino Royale, the very, very first James Bond novel. And given the events that happen in Casino Royale, it makes the most amount of sense. So let's dive into that. Given that Casino Royale is the first novel in the whole series, the events that occur in this story is what sets up James Bond for the rest of the stories that come afterwards. So it's a pivotal stepping stone for the characterization of James Bond. Because anything that happens in this, basically, like, domino effects into other stories. Because what happens in this story does not really get resolved properly. It always just keeps coming back. So, when we think about, like, James Bond as a spy, like, what is, like, the definition of a spy? And it's like, well, basically, a person who tries to get information, like secret information, from another organization, another country, like another person, and well, that sounds familiar. Like, given the fact that Sigma's ability is obviously the transfer and like obfuscation of information, it kind of fits in very nicely. Obviously not perfect, because generally, obviously, James Bond doesn't exactly give out info in return for the info that he finds out, apart from just going, Bond, James Bond, and that's it. Or letting you know how he likes his martinis. Maybe shaken, not stirred, maybe stirred. It depends on how he's feeling. When it comes to the book version of Casino Royale and the film version, there are some differences, because obviously there's always differences. But if we just take the book, like face value, blah, 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 right? Bond is in France. The story is set in France. Where is Meursault? Oh yeah, France. So, convenient. He gambles at a casino. Obviously, we've already established this. Where do we find Sigma? What is he in charge of? He owns a fucking casino. So, yeah. Tick. In the story, he stops the Russians from enacting world terrorism. Well, given the fact that Sigma changes sides, yeah. Especially turning against Fyodor. So, that's a tick. Dee-dee. And now this is the one that's like, it's not exactly true, but it is very interesting how it is actually relevant. So, Bond's love interest dies, okay? But this is where, like, one of the differences between the book and the film are different, but they're very, very, very interesting in how they came to be. So, in the book, Bond's love interest poisons, like, herself to save Bond's life. Yeah, injecting poison in France. Meursault. Where did they take poison? But obviously, not really for Sigma, because Sigma isn't actually the one that takes the poison. However, given the fact that Sigma teams up with Dazai, Dazai's the one that takes the poison. Yes, I'm literally now implying that Dazai's the fucking love interest. I just realised that as I said that. But anyway, the film, right? The film version doesn't have her poison herself. She drowns in an elevator. Now, where have we seen that? Who almost drowns in an elevator in this series around Sigma? Oh yeah, Sigma almost drowns, along with Dazai, who I've just made the impression is love interest now. Well, they do technically have a kiss, even if it is just to exchange air and it's not actually a kiss. But you can see where we're like moving towards this theory being like very steady and very like relevant, and that's what I love about this theory. It's like, it's so good in pointing out all these wee things, and I was like, that makes so much sense. I love it. A point that Skelly Choo Choo brings up is when we're introduced to Sigma, Sigma ends up discussing about customers, like certain clientele and whatnot. And in the manga, the only names we kind of get are Mal and Lazarus. And Lazarus is always being kind of perceived as being a crime and punishment reference, because the main character in that talks about Lazarus, obviously, who like rises, like comes back from the dead, reincarnates, and like, you know, like stuff like that. So that was the kind of impression of that was relating to Fjordur and whatnot. And Mal, I don't know if it's like meant to be like a wee nod to, you know, like communists Mal. That's the only Mal I kind of think of, because these are like, Lazarus is kind of known, right? So it's like, well, why would you bring somebody called like Lazarus and then just have Mal? So I don't know if like wee bit, because Mal was also wrote things. He did like poetry and whatnot, whilst obviously being like the communist philosophical kind of guy as in China, and also has like his own kind of movement of Maoism. So whether or not that is a reference to him, just know like a kind of nod off to like him, because it's kind of like how we have Carl as the kind of impression that Carl is Karl Marx and Maoism came from Marxism. It's like a kind of a development of it in his own style. So I don't know if it's just little nods here and there to just other people. So that's what's in the manga. Now, in the anime series, Mao ends up getting the name Fleming. Like, there's like paperwork and whatnot where you can see it. So Mao gets Fleming, which is obviously Ian Fleming's surname. And Lazarus is still there. However, there's a third customer that we get to see and whatnot. And that is Adolf Getler. I'm hoping I've said that right. Now, Adolf Getler is a character in Casino Royale. And Adolf Getler is like the reason for James Bond's love interest, Vesper, I forgot to mention their name earlier on, but it's Vesper, to die. And how this story works was Vesper used to work alongside Getler. She used to be a terrorist alongside him. But then obviously switched sides after meeting Bond. So like Sigma used to be a terrorist until meeting Dazai. Not like, you know what I mean. So it's interesting the fact that the anime added in this extra little character, especially because Asagiri has been very hands-on with like season 4 and 5, where we've been introduced to Sigma and whatnot. So it's interesting that just out of any name that they could have picked for just like a character, like a random side character, like background character, it had to be a character from Casino Royale. So we're getting a little bit more of a solid foundation for how this theory is working. Now, let's take Sigma's name as a potential clue to being Ian Fleming, because yeah, let's just look at the thing that's been like straight in our face. Like, his actual name. So, in the novel Casino Royale, right, Bond is interrogated / tortured. He's tortured, really, by the Russian villains, right? Russian terrorists and whatnot. And they carve the Cyrillic for sh, which looks like this. Basically a very, very, very straight W. If you were looking at it with a very terrible English viewpoint, which you really shouldn't because it's a whole different language. But basically, they write down that Cyrillic letter as a short form for shpun, which is, if I've said that right, which I probably haven't, but basically it is Russian for spy. So basically they are branding him as a spy so that in the future, that if they ever look upon his hand and see that Cyrillic version, basically it's like, oh, you're a spy, you're our enemy, like, fuck you. So, and it's very, very, very important because it sets up James Bond for the rest of the series. Like, just that branding alone, like, sets up, like, the rest of the series. Now, you're probably wondering, wait, that is Russian, that is Cyrillic, like, how does that make Sigma? That doesn't say Sigma, like you've just said. You've literally just said that it's short from Shpn, which is for spy, right? Well, holy fuck, to see this part of the theory, it is mind-blowing. And the fact that Skill Choo Choo, like, came up with this, like, worked this out, I am hella impressed, because how? I don't know, but I am so impressed. So yeah, make sure you definitely check out the whole thread or the document, because they deserve it after all the work they've put into this, right? So you take, like, the Cyrillic version, right? And apparently, you take that, and the Greek equivalent to, like, that lettering, like that Cyrillic and whatnot, is the Greek lettering for Sigma, which we would use. It's like, what? How? It is so impressive, the fact that that can just all come around. They also have, like, a note that, like, both the symbols of the Sigma and the Cyrillic letter for Shum, like, are directly, like, derivative of another character in, like, Samaritan script. And it looks very similar to the Cyrillic. And in fact, it's just basically this little diagram that they've made, and it just kind of emphasizes all of this. But it's so fascinating that... See, this is why languages are so fucking amazing. Like, you can literally just do this, and it's so good. Oh, beautiful. Mwah. They also have a wee moment about, like, how, like, Sigma's name and, like, Japanese, like, is actually, like, Shiguma, which obviously sounds very close to Sigma and, like, the English pronunciation of it. So it's just languages, brilliant. Finding clues within languages, top notch work. Honestly, commendable. With that, it makes a lot of sense that Sigma could be, like, Ian Fleming. Basically a visual, almost like a representation of James Bond. Like, you're just taking the James Bond series as a whole, and that is Sigma. Casino Royale sets up Bond's entire story. Like, we've already said this. Like, it's established that the series, basically, all the events that happen, basically domino effect into the rest of the series. And it makes sense given the fact that Bond for the rest of the series has a motivation to, like, defeat Russians for, like, the rest of the time. So basically, because they tortured him and all the things that they did, like, resulting in Vesper getting killed and whatnot, like, obviously trying to act like do the global domination and whatnot, Bond doesn't like that. So it makes sense in that regard, because when you look at it in Sigma's point of view, though Sigma isn't actually branded by, like, Fyodor or anything like that, what Fyodor gives to Sigma as a motivation is his casino, is the Sky Casino, because the Sky Casino was, like, a home for him, and Sigma is very much like, yes, I need a home, and I want to protect it with all costs, like, this is mine. And thus, like, that is now his motivation to go against Fyodor, because it's like, well, what you're planning to do is ruining what I could potentially have. And frankly, I don't like that. Even though, like, you have, like, bestowed this upon me, which, if you think about it, given the fact that Sigma doesn't know anything about himself prior to, like, 3 years or anything like that, and essentially gets given the name Sigma, so he is, in a sense, branded with Sigma on him. We go back to the whole language thing. It makes sense, which is why it's fascinating. Now, speaking of homes, Bond in the series is an orphan, right? And spends a lot of time wondering, like, what home means to him, right? In the film Skyfall, we actually see his childhood home, which is called Skyfall. Like, if that's just, like, not, like, helping connect the dots, I don't know what is. Because given, obviously, like, we've already established, Sigma was brought in the arc of Skyfall, where his home is the Sky Casino. Honestly, it's all just falling into place, and frankly, see if it ever gets revealed that Sigma is not Ian Fleming, it's going to be so heartbreaking. Like, lots of parallels to homes, because Sigma, like, discusses the fact that he wants a home, he wants a place that can be his, like, he just wants to be left alone, which is a mood, because obviously, from what he remembers, as soon as he's came into this whole, like, world, like, 3 years ago, all that has happened to him is being used and abused, essentially. Anyone just finds him, just takes him in, uses him, and then just chucks him away. And that's it. And he just wants a place to call his own. Now, in the thread, there's, like, a lovely little hints of, like, what we get from the anime, and, like, the manga is all, like, kind of different in that regard. But there's nice little tidbits about, like, how they kind of slide in, if that makes sense. So it's like, we kind of get a glimpse of what could have been. There's a moment within the anime where when Sigma's talking about, like, having a home and whatnot, we see this lovely house and whatnot. But see if you compare that house to Ian Fleming's actual house. There is some high similarities I found out. And I was like, now that is interesting. Now, in the anime, there was also when you get introduced to Sigma's backstory, you see him in the desert with the church and whatnot. And there's also, it's like, well, that doesn't really match up with the house in Skyfall. And I was like, well, that's fair. But there's also that little kind of chapel in Skyfall, which could kind of link up, but it's a bit more loose. But you can kind of see where it's going. So you can check up on that part. Now, one of the things that I love to moan at Sigma about is the way he undermines himself and calls himself an ordinary man, where he is far from ordinary. He is far from it. And you're probably wondering, right, how does this relate to James Bond? And frankly so, makes sense. But here's the kicker. The whole ordinary man thing all kind of stems back to the actual name of James Bond and how Ian Fleming named him. Because what Ian Fleming wanted to do was to not have a fancy name. It was just like, here is James Bond, basic ass James Bond. Like, nothing fancy, it's simple, it's nothing, like, too in your face. Like, James is a normal name. Bond was maybe a common name back then. I've never personally met a Bond, but hey ho. Not saying it's not. But it's nothing, like, too extravagant or anything like that. But, like, you would find with a spy, they would have, like, the most, like, fancy names and whatnot, because it's like, ooh, secretive and showmanship and everything like that. But no. Ian Fleming wanted a boring ass name and actually named James Bond after a guy that wrote a book about birdwatching. Like, damn. Ian Fleming even did an interview with The New Yorker, like, years ago, where he discussed, like, how James Bond's name came to be and how he basically nicked the name. So, and I quote, When I wrote the first one in 1953, I wanted Bond to be an extremely dull, uninteresting man to whom things happened. I wanted him to be the blunt instrument. One of the Bibles of my youth was Birds of the West Indies by James Bond, a well-known ornithologist, and when I was casting for a name for my protagonist, I thought, my god, that is the dullest name I've ever heard. So, I appropriated it. Now, the dullest name in the world has become an exciting one. Ian Fleming even incorporated this into his series with the final book that he wrote, The Man with the Golden Gun. James Bond is like very close to getting recognition and public recognition for all the work that he's done and whatnot. And Ian Fleming makes that point of, no, James Bond just wants their privacy. Like, he doesn't want to be involved. He doesn't want anyone to know his name. Doesn't want to know his face and whatnot. Like, he just cares for the privacy. With his very, very dull name, he can just go on with life. Now, that is very similar to, like, Sigma's own desires. Like, they just want their own privacy. They want their own peace. They just don't want to be, like, you know, publicly out there, if that makes sense. So their stories are very, very intertwined, which is why this theory is very, very strong, in my opinion. Because they have the exact same motivations, the same kind of goals, and, well, even Sigma, like, himself says about how, like, he really cares about his privacy and whatnot, like, how he values, like, his own home where no one can reach him, which was in, like, chapter, like, 98. Speaking of other stories, let's talk about a different one, shall we, that really, really helps cement Sigma being, like, very James Bond-esque, and that is You Only Live Twice. And in that story, Bond ends up in Japan with amnesia. He's assumed dead, and, well, his life all gets written into a book. Yes, literally. James Bond's, like, adventures and life and whatnot gets written into a book series, and that is what kind of triggers, like, his memories back. Like, sorry, but yeah. And not only that, right, but in You Only Live Twice, because he has the amnesia and everything like that, he gets brainwashed by the Russians to then commit global terrorism. Does that sound familiar? Not that, like, Fyodor is technically brainwashed Sigma into committing terrorism. It's just very, 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 very highly manipulated him into doing such things. Because Sigma probably didn't really have much of a choice. So, yeah, a little bit too convenient that Sigma, who doesn't know really much about their life, in Japan, deriving from a book, because basically their life was instigated from a book, to then get the Russians to basically get them to commit global terrorism. You can't write this shit. Which then, like, leads me on to this next little part, right? Weaponry. Now, Sigma is one of the few characters that has been very, very open to using a gun. And you think, wait, that's maybe a bit of a stretch, right? It's like, wow, he uses a gun. It's like, we've seen other characters use guns as such. And it's like, yeah, but maybe not as much as we've seen Sigma use them. Like, Sigma has been, like, around for a wee bit of time, right? And the span of, like, how much we've seen them and how much they use a gun, like, or a weapon and whatnot, the fact that the gun is his weapon of choice and main, like, armed force is like, yeah. Sigma has used a gun more than the members of the Armed Detective Agency. The Armed Detective Agency. Like, you know how people actually forget that they actually have guns until you watch Dead Apple and then there's that whole wall of guns, but, like, they generally don't use them. Like, if anything, like, the weapons that most people use is fucking Kurakira's book to make, like, a grenade of some kind. But not many of them actually use guns because they all have their own ways of like using like strengths and whatnot. So they don't actually need to really use guns. Now, to get back on track, why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about guns? Now, the gun that Sigma seems to use for the most part is almost identical to the gun that like James Bond uses consistently. Is it just a coincidence? Possibly. Is it just maybe this is just default gun, but then is it default gun because James Bond has such a high impact in the world? Who knows? But given the fact that someone uses a gun a lot, kind of helps. Also, just not to like overshadow like Sigma's other work. Remember the like big ass machine guns that he uses against Terriku? Yeah, this man is not afraid to use a gun. If anything, he fucking loves them. Who else likes to use a gun? James Bond. And speaking of lovely wacky versions of weaponry, quirky gadgets. Like, James Bond is well known for their gadgets, from like the clicky exploding pen and everything like that. Now, what would be the equivalent of a James Bond gadget that would be very quirky but very understated in when you looked at it? Could that be exploding money? We have exploding pens when you click them like 4 times. Like, why not have money that explodes? Like, I'm pretty sure Q at one point like thought, do you know what? Exploding money. And there's a little note in Skelly Choo Choo's notes that years and years and years ago, there was branded toys for James Bond for exploding money. So, take that! So those may be a wee bit weaker for those, like... I know this is now, like, towards the end now, so those ones are maybe considered a bit weaker and, like, proving the point of, hey, look, Sigma is Ian Fleming. And there's other wee points, as I stated at the beginning of the video, of Skelly Choo Choo, like, talks about and whatnot, like, talks about, like, the desert and whatnot. But I didn't really feel like they were necessary to comment, because it's just kind of like a wee off thing. So, but if you want to check that out, as I said, it's in the doobly-doo in the description, so you can check it out for yourself and read it for yourself. Now that is their theory and what was released in April. So that is, I've now discussed what I wish to discuss of this theory from their point of view and how, like, all the evidence that they have presented makes sense for why Sigma is Ian Fleming. Now, I would like to add a little tidbit, because as of now, we have surpassed the manga and the anime, and we now have this lovely little episode that is, well, giving us a little bit of info that I wonder that could be relevant. Remember when I was talking about Sigma's name and how that kind of came about, where in the novel Casino Royale, Bond gets tortured by the Russians and gets marked and whatnot? Now, in the novel, after that happened, Bond was in a coma for 2 days. 2 days after that interrogation, like torture and whatnot. Now, as of right now, if we go by the anime timeline, because we're obviously still trying to catch up in the manga, who is in a coma right now? Oh yes, our boy Sigma is in a information coma. And although Fjordor is being like, oh no, he's never going to wake up from it. Bullshit. What if he's only in a coma for about 2 days? What if it really follows the Casino Royale way and that he's only in a coma for 2 days because of what the Russian did to him? Like, honestly. Because I know that a lot of people were being like, wait, Stigma's still in the building, why did Dazai not go back for him? It's like, well, there was more pressing matters to go after Fjodor first because Sigma's not really going anywhere. But what if it takes him like 2 days for him to wake up? Or is it 2 days before Dazai can get Sigma to get to somebody to potentially awaken him? This isn't copium, by the way. But I wonder, like, if that could be a potential thing of just really hammering home of how Sigma is Ian Fleming. I would love that, and I really kind of hope it is, because that little bit of information would be perfect to kind of help that, right? And I want to go into my own little thoughts about this even more, right? Because I just thought about this before I started recording. Now, what if, right? Because we've now finished with the Fyodor arc, right? Potentially, we could now go into Agatha Christie's arc, right? If they are taken over. Kind of how the theory of how the three masterminds and whatnot that were presented at the beginning of the series, like how their arcs will go. Because we've already had Fitzgerald, who was introduced first. Then we were given Fyodor's, and then we were introduced to Agatha Christie. But we've not had her intervene yet. And given the fact that Dazai, Chuya, and Sigma are now in France, Agatha Christie is in England with the Order of the Clock Tower. What if Dazai Big Brain goes, do you know what? Why don't we go to them? Because I could see Dazai doing that. That's the worst part. And this is how it starts Agatha Christie getting involved with the plot properly. I wonder. But who knows, because obviously at the end of the anime there was things were presented, right? Because if it's a reality difference of these are two different versions of people from a different timeline and whatnot, Agatha Christie could get involved, because it's like, what the fuck are yous doing in Japan? Like, why do yous keep doing this? Kind of like how she was trying to get involved with Dead Apple and whatnot, and then almost getting involved with 55 Minutes and whatnot. So, could be like that. And this is maybe how she gets introduced. So, which would be nice, because Ian Fleming is British, right? What if, at some point, if it's not a case of Sigma, like, wasn't an original person that was just derived from the book, what if Sigma actually used to be a member of the Order of the Clock Tower, he died, and then the book brought him back? Because, as we stated earlier, one of the customers in Sigma's casino is called Lazarus. And James Bond actually says one of his favourite hobbies is resurrection. So, what if that all comes part and parcel with Sigma? Because then if it's like revealed that like Sigma used to be part of the Clock Tower, and it's like, oh, now that's interesting, because then Fyodor might have had a hand in that, because it's like, well, I know that you used to exist, and I could use you for like your abilities and whatnot. So there we have it. There is the theory that Sigma is Ian Fleming. Like, honestly, Skelly Choo put in a lot of work into this, and I'm thankful for the fact that I didn't have to go reading all the like James Bond novels and movies to like help back myself up for this theory. So like, honestly, props to them. Go check them out. Give them love, because damn, that's a good ass theory. And like I said, there is other people that have also talked about it. The only reason why I'm highlighting this one is because this is the one that I've seen. And oh, it's so good. And it's just nice to kind of jump off of as well, because I read this and then I was like, right, do you know what? I'm going to have a little look into Casino Royale myself, because this theory came out in April, and obviously things have happened since then. And because I found out that like Bond went into a coma, I was like, oh, okay, right. He was in a coma for 2 days after what the Russians did to him. Sigma is now in a coma because of what a Russian did to him. And it was just like, oh, maybe this could still work. So, yeah. I really just love how this kind of ended up. So, yeah. So anyway, let me know your wee thoughts down below. And also, is there any other little theories that you have came across that you would like me to talk about or look into? Because, honestly, theories are just good. Like, see, even if, like, they're bonkers, like, some of them are just so intriguing about how you can really interpret like information to like make that happen. So there is another theory video that I actually have planned. I just need to spend time actually setting it up. But it is going to be interesting, and I've got a feeling people are not going to like some of it. I don't know why, but it's a Dad's Eye theory and whatnot. But yeah, so yeah, look forward to some more theory videos. I really like looking into what other people kind of came up with. Kind of like how the first video, like none of my like the theories and that were like my own original theories. It was just things that I just randomly came across and then kind of looked into a wee bit more. And frankly, that was fun. And I've actually been meaning to do one of these like kind of theory videos for a while. Like even prior to seeing this theory in April, like I'd already thought like I should really go back into like diving into what people are coming up with and whatnot. So yeah, but I have a little slight theory, and yeah, we'll see how that goes. So that'll come out in like 2 years' time by the time I bloody write it. Since this took like half a year. Oh, but anyway, we will be back with more Bungo Stray Dogs content soon. And if you like that, I have a big ass playlist where you can interact with all of that. I will obviously have my chapter reviews coming soon at the end of the month, and then obviously at the beginning of the month, and well, anything in between, because frankly now that the anime is over, I really need to start making the content that I was trying to make all year, but didn't. So anyway, until next time, I'm AJ, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.